Good afternoon, good morning, based on your time zones. As was introduced, my name is Bhusan. I'm the Chief Business Development Officer and co-founder of Add Value Mission Inc., in shortly AVM. AVM is an enterprise generative AI company. We have a platform that is secure and compliant to deploy generative AI in enterprises. So today's my focus is not going to be to get into the technical details of generative AI. Instead, I'll be focusing on really unlocking the business value, in enterprises with generative AI. So just coming to my background, I basically the last 15 plus years, I've been working with enterprise customers with their digital transformation initiatives. Before, co-founding Add Value Machine, I was the global machine learning business development lead at Amazon Web Services, working with customers across US and Asia Pacific, Japan regions in implementing their machine learning projects, including developing large language models. Before that, I was the global director for AI business at Lenovo Data Center Group. And prior to that, I led GPU business development at NVIDIA. So one must be living under the rock, if they haven't, come across ChatGPT, because it took the world by storm when OpenAI first, launched this back in November of last year. So this is one of the generative AI application that really reached 100 million users just in a couple of months. Just to put other applications in perspective, it took Netflix nearly 10 years to kind of reach these many users, 6.5 years for Google Translate, 3+ years for Instagram, and more, like 1.5 years for TikTok. So you can see the rate of adoption is really, very, very high. And it truly created an AI revolution because the language model can understand prompts and be able to really respond human-like, answers. And that has a lot of implications in enterprises, from automating customer service all the way to creating new content. And this really helped them now, to rethink how they want to, do their digital transformation journey. Here is some data. It's actually collected by Salesforce Inc. They talked to 500 IT executives, and out of them, within just few months after launching an application like ChatGPT, many of them are actually making generative AI a priority for their business in the next 18 months. It's almost like 2/3 of the IT leaders who were surveyed made it a priority. Generative AI has been there for some time, but now it's kind of, going to this tectonic shift in terms of, adoption. So what is generative AI? Basically, a lot of you guys might have already come across this. It's basically a type of artificial intelligence that can generate new content, so it can create text, it can create images, video, audio, music. So it can actually create content. How is this different from conventional AI, like machine learning and deep learning that we've been, deploying over the last decade? So that is basically very good at predictive analytics and pattern recognition. So what I meant to do, say is, if you, let's say you want to forecast demand, for, in your store. So you actually collect the historical data, you create a predictive model. Similarly, if you look at computer vision and natural language process applications, we've been trying to do object detection, classifying images, trying to find entities in text. So that's where the conventional AI has been successful in enterprises. But what is today really kind of accelerating the adoption of generative AI are these foundation models. So these foundation models are trained on large corpus of data, and that is actually now enabling this generative AI versus other techniques in the past, like GANs, like variation encoders, and like RNNs and other techniques. So let's just quickly contrast conventional AI versus generative AI, isn't it? So this is what we've been doing over the last decade, where you want to kind of apply AI for a task. So let's say you want to do sentiment analysis of product reviews. So you have millions of product reviews that customers are putting there. You want to understand, what is the sentiment of that. So what we do is you basically take a review and then you put a label to it. Let's say it's from 1 to 5. Like 1 being not good, 5 being the best, and then you take these millions of these reviews and you go and train a model. And that model can only do sentiment analysis. Now, if you want to do text summarization, you go and build another model. If you want to do entity recognition, you go and build another model. So that's how the conventional AI has been getting into the enterprises. And we're building these models and deploying those in closed doors typically, or buying a solution. Whereas the approach to generative AI is much different. So this is where you take massive amounts of unlabeled data. So this could be pretty much kind of crawling through the internet and create this very large model, what's called a foundation model, with what's called pre-training. So this is where you employ techniques like semi-supervised learning instead of supervised learning, where we were doing conventional AI. You apply these techniques and you build this model. But in order to really get the best in order to really use this model, now you need to tune it for a specific task. So this is where you take a foundation model and now you tune it by giving some examples on how to do sentiment analysis, how to do text summarization or document summarization, and how to do entity recognition. So that's how it is. It's much different, where you are taking a large model and now you are actually tuning it to do a task, rather than you are starting from scratch, using data to create models and deploy it. So that's the biggest difference on conventional versus generative AI. And that also reduce the entry to barriers. For example, the enterprise doesn't have a lot of data to create these models, and if they don't have the skills to do these models, now all they can do is they can just go take the foundation model, fine tune it, and be able to deploy AI very easily. So that's the reason why generative AI has picked up so much steam right now. So what are some of the use cases and offerings out there, isn't it? So you can see generative AI is very effective in summarizing documents. And if you go to any enterprise, like the legal function, the finance function, and the contracts divisions, they have a lot of these long documents, that they need to analyze, and summarize. And this is where generative AI is being deployed. And chatbots, again, chatbots have been there for a long time. But these chatbots can actually create human-like experiences. For example, so this week I arrived in India, and I need some help from Airtel. So I actually got into the chatbot, and I couldn't actually get a good response from the chatbot, because it's rules based. It uses very traditional ML, and it doesn't have the right context to really help me with my question. So similarly, question and answering systems, these are open book question and answering system, where you kind of give a knowledge base, and then be able to ask questions to find relevant answers from that. So the third use case is search, enterprise search. Especially most of the enterprise search is based on keyword search, whereas it's very difficult to find relevant information from keyword search, where you need to use the semantics, the meaning of the question, in order to go and actually find the right response. So this is again a use case that we are seeing across a lot of our customers. So on the other side, you have content generation. Like, so for example, if you have a marketing function, you want to create new brand images, you can actually go and do that. In fact, the AVM logo that you saw, like in my first slide, it was actually generated with AI. Like, so we created that brand, like image with AI. Code generation is big because a lot of enterprises have their software, development, and this is where they can actually leverage generative AI. And some of the offerings out there, as you guys are very familiar with OpenAI, they have the ChatGPT, which I already talked about. They have DALL-E 2. This can actually create images. They have Codex for code generation. And recently, Amazon launched their foundation models with Amazon Bedrock service, which has a Titan model, which Amazon developed. But it also hosts like models from third parties like AI21, Cohere, etc. Midjourney is another image generator model, and Google, as you know, Google announced their Bard, models, the chatbot application as well. So what are the benefits for enterprises? We've been talking about use cases and technology, but if you really look into the benefits it can deliver, are traditionally what we have seen with AI is not, but this can actually take it to the next level. You can now create chatbots to provide, more contextual responses, and so that the user can feel that, almost another human is actually serving them. That can actually create a better customer experience. And you can build Q&A systems for knowledge workers to find the relevant information in enterprises. You can upskill your workforce with a lot of training using generative AI. You can create co-pilots. You can help them with software development. And again, you can actually process a lot of complex documents, legal documents, financial documents, contract documents, in order to find, to analyze those documents. And also you can analyze unstructured data to kind of, drive insights so that it can help with the decision making. And also you can create a lot of new content, you can, music, videos, brand videos, you can create all of that. And you can quickly iterate on your product designs, and you can also accelerate research, like for example, drug discovery and all of them is actually now being accelerated with generative AI. So those are some of the benefits for enterprises. And just let's quickly look at some of the case studies out there. The first one is Morgan Stanley. They actually worked with OpenAI, and they deployed this internally facing chatbot for their employees, especially for their financial advisors. So these are the folks where they need to help customers make the right portfolio decisions. So in that process, they need to refer a lot of documents. They look at analyst reports, they look at market data, they look at stock, how stocks are doing, they look at industry data, and they need to be able to actually find all of this relevant information and to be able to actually provide that advice to their customers. So this is where Morgan Stanley created a chatbot for a comprehensive search from all of these documents, so that they can instantly, be able to find the right information. So it's actually tested with about 200 to 300 financial advisors. Now they're planning to roll this to their whole 16,000, advisors across Morgan Stanley offices. Apple is another case study where they use generative AI for sentiment analysis. So this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's actually, you take a foundation model and you'll be able to tune the foundational models to perform sentiment analysis. And Morningstar, again, is another financial institution. It's using it to summarize documents. Morningstar kind of publishes these research reports, and they can actually now use this generative AI to summarize those and be able to kind of extract insights and be able to push to their customers. So these are some of the use cases, but of course, today your imagination is the only limitation for use cases with the generative AI, because it has a it's such a transformational technology. In spite of the benefit, you might surprise that there are a lot of enterprises today that are restricting ChatGPT and similar offerings, isn't that? So, I mean, these are big names. You can see these are the companies that are actually pushing innovation. They are the ones who adopt, like new technologies, but then they're actually either banning or restricting, like the use of these generative AI tools, including Citigroup, Bank of America, Walmart, my former employer, Amazon. Samsung recently made headlines where some of their employees actually put their code into ChatGPT, and also some of the strategy documents, so this is becoming a big concern. These are actually today's headlines, isn't it? The security is becoming a big concern with generative AI. So let's look at quickly on how enterprises are using ChatGPT to see what are some of these security vulnerabilities are. For example, if you take an employee goes, they log into the web interface of ChatGPT, and then they send some request. So the request could have some sensitive information, isn't that? So we work with a lot of private equity companies. Like the private equity companies, they always try to analyze their deal documents. Like they want to compare financials from one company to another company. When they put that, actually, that information is being, sent to the OpenAI API or public internet, and then they do get a response back. But look at the three key vulnerabilities here. One is there's no enterprise security. Employees are actually using their own accounts to access ChatGPT. So there's no observability for the IT security, and whatever the data that you are sending, it's actually crossing over public internet. There are cyber criminals who can actually steal this information. Third is, once even it reaches the API, the model providers can actually use that to improve their models. Of course, you can opt out of some of the OpenAI today, from OpenAI models, but there's always fine print. You cannot control, once the data leaves your enterprise boundary, whether someone is actually how they are going to use your data. So those are some of the security concerns when it comes to ChatGPT. And here is some data to back that up, isn't it? So this is very interesting data. So if you look at the time frame for this data, it was collected just few months, 3 months after the initial launch of ChatGPT. That's November 30th to March 21st. This was collected by a company called Cyberhaven. And what they found out is 8.2% of employees have used ChatGPT in the workplace at that time in March. But by now, I think this number should be like 30% or 40%, definitely, like someone must be, like at least using the ChatGPT. But out of that, 6.5% of employees, they've pasted company data into it. What kind of data are they pasting it? I mean, internal only data, client data, source code, PI data, PHI data. Imagine the implications of putting personal health information if you're a healthcare company, who has to follow HIPAA, compliance. And this has a lot of security and compliance implications to this, isn't it? And moreover, look at this, the last fact. 70% of the workers, they did not even tell their manager that they are using ChatGPT. So imagine the amount of, security vulnerability, this can actually cause, by just, letting the employees access ChatGPT, directly. So apart from the security and compliance issues, if you look at a foundation model, so today, for example, if you're a knowledge worker, you would go and ask a question that's related to your business. You send a prompt to the foundation model like a GPT 3.5 or GPT 4, and all it gives you is a generic response, because these foundation models, as I mentioned earlier, are trained on internet data, mostly internet data. But where is the business context lies in? The business context is in enterprise databases. It is in the enterprise data warehouses or somewhere in cloud storage that the enterprises, store their data. So these foundation models, they don't have the right business context. So most of the responses it gives are very, very generic. So that's something, that you need to keep in mind when you use the foundation model. And there's also a related issue called hallucinations or accuracy issues, because they try to give responses that are so convincing, they're not accurate. Once you start using it, everything that comes out of it, you have to make sure, how accurate that is. So the hallucinations is an issue. Bias is a major issue, because when you go on, like look into this internet, we don't know how that data represents the different population groups, because not all of that is accurate data, isn't it? I mean, when you go and build a machine learning model, you're creating a label. What is that label? The label is the ground truth. You make sure there is truth behind the data. But when you build a foundation model, that lack of truthfulness actually, gives you these issues with hallucinations and bias. So what are some of the ways to actually overcome these issues? Whether, first of all, you want to bring your own business context. So there are multiple ways to do that. But what you need to look into that is the accuracy or the cost of doing that, and also what is the complexity and what is the effort required for that. You can do prompt engineering and give snippets of your own information to kind of, change the model behavior. But the amount of, written would be very limited, because with prompt engineering, you can only go to, so far with that. So the next approach that without changing the model parameters, that means you are not going to retrain the model, or you are not going to, build a model. The another approach, which is very popular and more cost-effective, is what is called in-context learning or few-shot learning. So in this approach, what you do is you basically give few examples, or you provide the context, along with your prompt. So when both the prompt and context goes to the foundation model, the response that you get is actually more accurate. So this is a very effective approach where you don't want to go and fine tune the models, which is kind of an expensive affair, and build a, like a domain specific model that's even more expensive. This is actually one of the ways that enterprises want to bring their own data to create the right business context in order to use the foundation models. So on fine tuning, this is where you don't actually update the whole model. You actually take a pre-trained model and then take some examples and be able to, like kind of change the weights a little bit so that, like the accuracy gets improved, and your own data, like is learned by the model, so that's the fine tuning. And there's also another way to bring your own data is to create domain specific foundation models. For example, this is what Bloomberg did, with their Bloomberg GPT, where they created a 50 billion parameter model. They spent to $5 to $10 million, like to create this domain specific foundation model, because they believe that will give them better accuracy for their use cases. So those are the kind of, like various options that you have. So when it comes to the hallucinations and bias, like on the accuracy, one thing you also need to keep in mind is if a model is accurate, it doesn't mean that it's less biased, isn't it? So this is the data that's coming from Stanford University. So they have a Center for Research on Foundation Models. They created this framework called holistic evaluation of language models. And what they do is they actually take these models, the foundation models, either they're closed or open source models, and then they run some benchmarks and publish this data. So what this data is showing is, if you look into these 5 models, like the first one is Cohere Command Beta. This is a 52 billion parameter model, all the way to Anthropic, Text DaVinci from OpenAI, TNLGs from Microsoft and NVIDIA. And if you see from bottom to top, the accuracy is kind of, like decreasing a little bit, the blue bar. But the bias has a different trend, like even though the Anthropic LM is least accurate out of these 5 models, on the bias, it's doing better. By the way, here, the higher is the better, like, so when I say higher bias, it doesn't mean that there's more bias, the performance of bias is better on this. So, I mean, the point here is when a model is accurate, it doesn't mean that it represents all populations. So you need to make sure the bias is also balanced, like, along with the accuracy. So just to sum up all of this discussion that we have, talked so far, if you truly want to leverage generative AI in enterprises, you need to keep these 3 things in mind. That first of all, it has to be compliant. It needs to be secure, like you need to be able to inspect the data that goes to these foundation models. And you should also audit your prompts and keep the human in the loop. And the responses that you get should be contextual to your business. And the prompts that you generate should be able to, like the whole organization should be able to leverage that. And the model selection should be based on performance requirements, whether it's biased for a task, or you may have to even build custom models, like for your domains, or fine tune for specific tasks. And also, most importantly, you need to be able to integrate this generative AI into your existing enterprise systems in order to reduce friction, with the users. So these are the three core requirements to actually deploy generative AI in enterprises. So it's not as easy as just open a ChatGPT and go and put few prompts and get responses. So this is a much more larger effort. So this is where our mission is basically to help enterprises harness the power of generative AI by giving a platform that is compliant, that can be customized, and that can kind of give you the right context for their own businesses. So how do we tackle these issues that we talked about, isn't it? So this is our platform, the AVM platform. Right now it's deployed on AWS, but it can be deployed on any cloud provider. First of all, we follow all security best practices on the infrastructure level. And then our platform itself goes through these certifications in ISO 27001, SOC 2, HIPAA, CSA, so that healthcare and financial companies can actually deploy our platform. And the way it works is, first of all, a user actually comes in and use their SSO, the single sign-on feature of their enterprise standard security, standards, isn't it? So using their own Active Directory, they can log into our user interface. The AVM user interface is basically a productivity tool, so it has a lot of prompts designed for, every function of the organization, and it's easier to collaborate. It's easier to go back and, create different projects, generative AI projects. So this is kind of basically a productivity tool, you can think of that. And once a user actually submits a query or a prompt, it goes to our API. And then from this API, it gets logged. Every action, whatever the user is actually putting there, it gets logged. And then the CISO can actually, or the IT security can now run analytics on top of that. What is actually going out into these, these foundation models or API services. And then what we do is not just logging, is that we go and do compliance checks. We look for PI data, PCI data, PHI data, or you can also customize for your enterprise. What do you want to actually, find out, and what do you want to stop sending out? So you can actually customize these compliance checks. And have an enterprise policy. Okay, if you find this data, block it. If you find this data, you anonymize it. So if you find this data, it's okay, you can send it. So based on the compliance checks, if it passes all the compliance checks, it goes to the foundation model, the API service, and then you get a response back. So this is the kind of enterprise security and compliance we bring to any of the offerings, isn't that? So it's not limited to Azure OpenAI, but we can also deploy same Cohere models, Hugging Face models, Amazon Bedrock models. And also this model agnostic is a key feature of our platform, because there's so much innovation happening here. You can't just say, okay, I'm only going to stick to OpenAI models, or I'm going to only stick to Cohere models, isn't it? So there's a lot of innovation happening. And I also showed is that some models are good for accuracy, some models are good for bias, some models are good for task specific, jobs. So you need to have that freedom to be able to use the right foundation model for the right job. So that's what our platform helps enterprises. So on our platform, you can go and build solutions. So one of the solutions that you can build is this in-context learning, where you can securely bring your enterprise data. How do you do that? You actually, for example, you take bunch of documents, these could be PDF, Word, text. This could be our own knowledge bases today, that are stored, and it goes through the same compliance checks, and it goes to a foundation model. And these foundation models now create embeddings. So basically, embeddings are this numerical representation of the data, whatever the document, and this actually helps us to do a semantic search. So semantic search is try to find information based on the meaning. So you store in this knowledge base, and again, when somebody goes and actually try to ask a question and submits a prompt, and the prompt goes to the compliance check, it goes to the foundation model, but before it finds a response, it goes and looks into this knowledge base for the context, so, and then it finds the context, brings that context back. Now using both the prompt and context, it delivers the relevant response. So this is how the in-context learning works. I think I'm having some problem with the slide. Okay, so just to quickly compare the ChatGPT versus our generative AI platform, I mean, we have single sign-on and role-based access controls, which ChatGPT doesn't have. We do compliance checks. And on coming to logging, yes, like ChatGPT can do prompts and completions, but we do log much more than just prompts and completions. You can run security analytics for audits in our platform. Both ChatGPT and we actually offer API, but we have team prompting, we are model agnostic, and we have a scalable in context learning solution that ChatGPT doesn't bring, But if you want to use the ChatGPT's API, like function, you have to build all of these features in your enterprise, in order to deploy generative AI. So just, like we're coming close to that, I just have 1 or 2 slides. But okay, this is all good, but a lot of our customers also come and ask, where do we get started? So I mean, we see generative AI, it's hitting the news, like we have a lot of use cases. How do we actually, like start that kind of, maximize our return on investment, but that reduces our risk? So this is a 2x2 framework that enterprises can use. Basically, there's a risk dimension, there's a value dimension, and these are some of the activities that fall in on these 4 quadrants, isn't it? So, for example, you can write blogs and articles. It's a low value, low risk activity, but then the question and answer systems for knowledge workers is a very high value and low risk, because all you are doing is basically your knowledge workers are accessing information to serve your customers. You are not actually deploying a customer facing chatbot, which could be a little bit of high risk at this point with generative AI. So this kind of, helps you to deliver value quickly. But once, like your organization becomes more familiar, like with generative AI, you can now, build customer facing chatbots. Similarly, like medical diagnosis, legal agreements, these are like high risk, high value, and you need to be very careful in deploying these use cases. So just to sum up, like how do you manage the risk from generative AI? That first of all, you need to make sure your data is private and it's secure, so you need to make sure whatever the solution that you are deploying need to have these, like the right, policies to secure your data. And you need to develop responsible AI practices. And if you generate AI content, like you need to give credit to that so that, the users understand this is generated. I mean, it's generated. You need to make sure the copyrights are not violated and things like that. And you always have to bring your own data to improve the accuracy of these foundation models, because these foundation models are very, very generic. And test, validate. You need to do a lot of that, because it's very easy to use that models. It doesn't mean that they're accurate. You need to do that. But the most important thing, I think, to be successful with generative AI is you need to keep the human in the center. Yes, generative AI has a lot of benefits in automating, like in improving the productivity, but it doesn't mean that you should not put any guardrails. Today the guardrails that you can put is you keep the human in the loop, make sure the responses that you are getting are accurate, and before you put into production, like you need to have these checks, and balances. So I think that concludes my talk, and thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you so much for your valuable insights, Bhusan. Your insights on the difference between conventional models and generative AI models, generative model use cases, and benefits to the enterprises, data privacy and security concerns were really helpful in simplifying the business aspect of generative AI. So thank you so much, Bhusan, for your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.